when it comes to Israeli actions, the question that has been sort of in the air for a long time is, you'll hear from the conspiracies, Israel controlling America. We oftentimes say that America seems to have maybe too much control over Israel or seems to push Israel into certain direction. And I think today we'll be talking about sort of the opposite coin of that, and it's the fact that Israel is itself surrendering or giving up on a lot of sovereignty. It should sort of apply a lot of actions that it should do. For example, occupying Gaza, Netanyahu pretty much defaulted on, and that allows someone like America, who does want some stability in the region, to come in and then do whatever they find is the most actionable, which might in turn be something that is anti-Israel, such as having Qatar and Turkey being involved in the Gaza transitionary force when it comes to controlling Gaza. And yeah, that is the topic of today. Later in the show, we'll also bring up, there's been this video going around about one of the Iranian colonels talking about some possible revolt against the Iranian state. In a few days, he was saying there should be like a 1 million-man march. And I found a little bit more about it, so we can discuss that. Because I think no major media has covered it yet, so authenticity of it is a bit hard to determine, but I think there's still a few things to say, and I did find a few things. But also separate news that we do know is happening is the fact that Tehran, or rather Iran, might have to move its capital from Tehran because of the extreme drought that is happening in the north of the country, which I think can play a role when it comes to overthrowing the regime. As well. That is something we mentioned with Michael on Tuesday, and we can talk about it a little bit more today. Welcome to the reality show, and yeah, let's move on to the topic. Joining me today are Marco and Richard, and I think when it comes to any involvement between two countries, be it alliance or anything else, there is this question of, is this cooperation or is this oversight? Is this basically controlling of the actions? Something that is happening right now is people might remember, I think this was like a few months ago, where J.D. Vance came in. Before J.D. Vance, and I think this was shortly after the ceasefire, before J.D. Vance left, Marco Rubio came in. So it almost, and I think a little bit before that was when Trump came in. So it felt a little bit like you have this babysitter or this babysitter. Basically, every time you have like a major U.S. official in Israel at all times to basically ensure the sort of cooperation when it comes to the ceasefire. Now, the biggest thing that is happening right now is, of course, the both setting up of the base. There are two bases that are being talked about to be set up. One in the southern Israel to oversight the Gaza operations, and one potentially in Syria to oversight both Syria and potentially Israel. And what we have seen is increased involvement of America in oversight of the aid, in sort of even oversight of the IDF actions. So, Marco, what are we thinking here? Is this still a cooperation, or is this becoming more of an oversight of ensuring Israel does what America thinks is its interest right now?
Yeah, that's a tough one, to be honest. I don't really think it matters in the end because if you manage to achieve a stable, safe Israel, personally, I don't really care much whether it's cooperation or oversight or whatever. Of course, the Israelis would prefer to be a totally autonomous place, but then again, there was a close relationship with the United States before Trump anyway. The fact that President Otto Penn didn't really like Israel much, he wasn't very supportive of Israel. It doesn't deny the fact that there's always been a very strong relationship, both economic and also cultural with Israel. The problem here is that Israel kind of it looks like it's no longer really looking after its own interests. effectively he's accepted this weird. I cannot stress how weird this ceasefire deal is, and how suddenly it's been imposed on them, really. But which is nonetheless effective. You know, the hostages were returned. Most of the dead hostages are being returned. I think today there's another few of them who's going to be returned by the terrorists. So I really would like to be behind the scenes and know exactly what the Americans have actually promised the various tyrants and jihadis all around the Middle East, because the speed with which this deal took place and the effectiveness on it is unprecedented. Okay, there was a massive involvement of Trump himself. The president himself was fully behind Israel. However, when it came to stopping Israel after the deal, when it came to stop Israel from getting rid of Hamas altogether and continues pursuing Hamas from in the tunnels and in Gaza City itself, the US seemed to have stopped it because it would have harmed this deal. That's why it makes me wonder what have they actually agreed behind Israel's back. But then again, to repeat myself, as long as this guarantees the existence of Israel, you know, I don't have a problem. What I suspect that this is actually not the strong deal, 3,000-year-old peace that we've heard led to believe. It's all a bit too much bluster. And what's more important and probably worrying is that once Trump is out of the picture, are we going to be left with JD Vance, who doesn't seem to be as committed, or certainly seems to have weird ideas about the relationship with Israel?
Yeah, I think you can look at this from two different perspectives, to be honest, a broad perspective, and then the complexity of the individual factors involved and the changing nature of the personalities and the hidden information about which we're not certain yet, but we can only got some hints as to what people are likely to do, particularly when it comes to those nefarious regimes in the Middle East that are Israel's enemies. But let's start with a simple one, first of all. To the extent that American values, are the same as Israeli values, then I totally agree. It doesn't matter, whether it's cooperation or whether one has more influence over the other, so long as those values are being upheld. And if those values are the rights for individual people to live their lives and go about their lives free and secure, then so be it. But if you look at the other aspects of it, obviously America is a superpower, and obviously they are allies with Israel. But it's not the size of a country which is the determinant factor in whether it's sovereign or whether it's secure or not. And a country does have to stand up for itself. That is a vital fact. Does have to stand up for its citizens. And of course, the key factor is, and we know this with all sorts of allies across the world, who are allies in name alone, or to some extent, they work frequently against each other behind the scenes, whilst also claiming to be allies. I can name all sorts of different examples, but
France.
I'll let Marco do it. But anyway, even the fact that Turkey is an ally within NATO now, that's the destruction of the term ally, frankly, or an abuse of it. But nevertheless, that's So we've got to be clear what we mean by an ally and to what extent they are properly aligned on values. I think that's the crucial element. And then of course the level of influence kind of depends on how you see the direction of the US administration, what its attitude long term is, as opposed to right now in terms of supporting the current peace deal for the self-esteem of the president of the US and the prestige of it existing being a dominant factor over perhaps whether it is the right peace deal when implemented. And it depends what concessions suddenly crop up or are imposed upon anyone when it comes to attempting to implement it, because that can destroy whether it should even go ahead at all. And we don't yet know some of those factors. which will emerge. And of course, one of those is things like Syria and having a base in near Damascus, a US base near Damascus, and seeing what's his name this week, Al Jalani in the White House and all that. I think that makes my skin crawl, and my reaction is that Trump's being played here, or risks being played by an Islamist who's pretending to have relinquished that ideology. When has he really? And of course, Netanyahu has pointed out some of the things that will be necessary for him to trust the Syrian government more, such as a demilitarized zone, better protection for the Druze, where they're getting rid of jihadists within Syria, and of course, whether it's actually becoming a peaceful country next to Israel. So all of those factors are in it, and that's when it starts to get far more complex. And it depends how much you know, how much you can verify right now, how much you can trust, and how fluid it is as well. But in terms of the core factor, two countries that share the same core values should be allies, and that, as long as they're voluntarily working together, then it should be fine for the two to work together in that way. And of course, America is going to assert some extra influence because of the money it provides to Israel, but Israel is also chooses to accept that money as well, and therefore it chooses to work with America in terms of keeping its own security paramount. And of course, we saw that most when it came to Iran and the working together on the military strikes in Iran back in June, which took out the nuclear facilities, or at least severely pushed them back. And all of that was a big advantage of two allies working together. And nobody would say that they shouldn't have done so, because together they were stronger in that instance, because they were heading towards the same goal based on the same principles to the same end.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can, yes.
Okay, my PC or my internet went out for my PC, so I'm on my phone. But if you can hear me okay, we can continue a little bit. So I do want to go into sort of the way Israel has, I think, surrendered, or specifically Netanyahu. But first, something we can also quickly point out, and I think Bonnie in the chat has mentioned it. First, she has asked, do we even know specific terms of the deal, or who all the parties are, or what's happening right now? So when the original ceasefire was established, and we are talking about the one sort of right now, the 20.1, the fact is that Israel has only pushed through Knesset the first part of it. That includes the release of the all hostages and partial withdrawal of the IDF forces. The rest of it hasn't been agreed upon yet. The bodies of the dead hostages have still not been returned. So you could say, basically, until the hostages were given back, that's when the window started for both the Hamas demilitarization and IDF withdrawal, as well as the international force coming in. When it comes to what is now the official thing, I don't think we know. It's Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister of Israel, has even said that there isn't sort of like a full list of the things that are happening right now. It seems like the return of the hostages is happening. The IDF is staying at the yellow line, and is every now and then we hear a story about Hamas soldiers being targeted within the yellow line, meaning Hamas has crossed the yellow line that they are not supposed to. So there's that part, and yeah, possible talks about different countries, especially Turkey, Qatar, coming in and doing. Until I think we have like some official thing of Trump and Netanyahu coming in and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do now. Until then, we are going to be just in this state, and nothing will move on. Marco, do you have any thoughts on this one specifically?
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit on a good point there, because the fact that the first phase is not even finished and there's no talk about a second phase, Certainly, there's no agreement about a second phase because the second phase, importantly, includes the disarmament of Hamas. Hamas will actually cease to exist as a terrorist force. But you know, go and negotiate that with the terrorists if you like. I don't think this is going to end up well, and I think this might well the end of the, the 3,000-year-old better peace settlement that we never had before, and I don't think we're going to have it either later on. I don't think this is going to last. So far as you mentioned, the hostages are being returned. The living one have been returned. But yeah, I mean, if you believe that there's gonna be an easy agreement with the terrorists and also with the various tyrants and people who will want to be part of the force in Gaza, which is supposed to oversee the peace in Gaza, that's going to be interesting as well. Of course, as you mentioned, the involvement of Turkey, Qatar, and people who are quite open about not recognizing Israel or not wanting Israel to exist in the first place, certainly are less willing to have an Israel in itself than they used to a few years ago, or at least they're much more open about talking about hating Israel, like Turkey, for example. It's gonna be a very tough act to follow because lots of people in Israel will be against this. I mean, why would you want a force of people mainly against you just on the other side of the yellow line? That would be farcical, really.
And I think for this next phase, including the International Stabilization Force, who agreed to be in it or who said they might be interested in being in it was all based on a bunch of verbal agreements behind the scenes or verbal statements behind the scenes. The same as Hamas saying that they'd agreed to disarm was just a verbal statement behind the scenes. And of course, whether they're actually going to follow through with it, and of course whether those other countries are going to choose to actually send troops. And there's a big question as to how many countries want to send troops who are going to do anything other than stroll about and talk about peace all the time, and whether any of them are actually going to do any physical disarming of dangerous terrorists in the Gaza Strip, of actually disarming Hamas, because that is distinctly different from the first, to say the least. And I think one of the things that I've read recently about the International Stabilization Force is how they're going to implement it, and they're preparing at the moment a resolution to put through the UN Security Council in order to set it up. Now, I mean, how many times on this show have we told you that the UN shouldn't exist? And here you are once again legitimizing the UN and the Security Council as a means of deciding how security, policy is implemented on the international stage, with it being signed off, of course, as usual, by the permanent members, including Russia and China. Of course, last month, the presidency of the UN Security Council was Russia. This month, it's Sierra Leone. That top example of how to look after a country. All of that is deeply depressing, and even if they manage to get a resolution which passes all these dictatorships rubber stamp within the UN, and isn't ruined at that point on paper, it's then got to be actually implemented in a way that won't ruin it, and that's not going to happen until the start of 2026. And there are so many steps in which it can be frankly destroyed, either at root or in implementation, by those who don't want it to succeed.
And even after implementation, we've seen, for example, how UNIFIL worked very well with Lebanon, didn't it? The UN effectively looked the other way while Hezbollah was attacking and preparing to attack Israel. So, yeah, but frankly, I wouldn't worry too much about the involvement of the US. I would be more worried about the involvement of the UN.
Yeah, and we have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And Bonnie also in the chat said, do those leaders recognize those values? Can they articulate them? And I think this is the fundamental when you go into sort of not only the right thing for Israel, the right thing for America, right? Because I think fundamentally, both the Israeli and American values are pretty much the same when it comes to both its relationship and
think we might have lost your audio.
Can,
Hello?
we can hear you
Can you?
again now, Daniel. We couldn't for a moment there, but whether that was everyone or just us, I don't know. But
Oh,
please,
I think yeah, I think maybe my connection might be a bit unstable. Let me know if you can't hear again.
Sure.
Uh but yeah, when it comes to sort of fundamentally both America and Israel, I think, share values. But yeah, when it comes to implementing them, even when it comes to sort of achieving the right things, because what was the American policy on Israel for decades now was the two-state solution. That was the policy of pretty much every single American president, including the Republican ones, including George Bush. He was the one who wanted elections for the Palestinian Authority. So two-state solution was the basic idea. When it comes to Trump, he seems to go away from it, at least somewhat. But even then, what are the actual I think, oh, maybe Marco and Richard fell now. Oh yeah, I think Marco and Richard fell. Well, this stream is not going well with the Wi-Fi. Um, so yeah, I think Trump did go away from it a little bit, but even then, what is the actual goal you're trying to achieve, right? Because when it comes to the two-state solution of every single president before him, the goal was this peace. Now that went against Israeli interest, yet it still happened. But again, it was because Israel also wanted this. Israel actually went against its interest to achieve this two-state solution. This was not the right way to go. This was problematic, and this is what made so many Israeli problems. Now, when it comes to Trump, his main goal is peace. Now, this can both be good or not, depending on how you understand it. Because fundamentally, you could say we want peace. We believe that the peace can only be achieved if Israel occupies Gaza, if it establishes first military law, and in the future annexes all of Gaza, makes it part of Israel once Palestinians become de-radicalized, um, once they reject the idea of Palestinianism, which is calling for the destruction for this of the state of Israel. Once that and that is, sort of going for peace. But in Trump's terms of peace, it seems to be well, we'll go into sort of more into how Israel views it. But it seems to be basically surrendering, or basically, uh, trying to do whatever they can to make deals with the surrounding nations, to bring in Turkey and Qatar into Gaza, to have a ceasefire in Gaza, to release Hamas terrorists, with the hope of them wanting to be, wanting to have peace with Israel. Again, I have a quote from Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister. He said, stressing, he said, handing over control of our destiny to Hamas sponsoring Qatar and to Turkish President Erdogan is Oslo on steroids. And yeah, to some extent it is. I'm not, it's hard to determine necessarily if that is worse or better than Oslo. The fact is, yeah, with Oslo, you brought in a terrorist organization that has been fighting Israel for a long time to come in and become the government of Palestinians. You invited a terrorist organization to become a government for a population that wants the destruction of Israel. With Turkey and Qatar, you are again bringing in a foreign powers that are already enemies of Israel, that are already against the existence of Israel, and giving them control over a strip close to Israel. If you combine that together with the fact that Turkey is already growing its influence in Syria, and depending on how the Syrian regime goes, might share a border, or its controlled influence over Syria might be close to Israel. You might also be in a very scary situation. I think we might have Marco and Richard back. Yeah, not
Apologies.
fun today.
Yes, this is IT infected as program today, isn't it? For sure, yeah.
So,
But
so yeah, I'll just quickly summarize. Or
I did just want to respond to what
sure,
Bonnie put in the chat just
okay.
before we got froze and vanished. Um, because she was talking about, to what extent do they, demonstrate the values of the two countries in the first place. I think I used the phrase to the extent that, and of course that is, it always feels like a mealy mouthed caveating phrase when you say it, but of course that is the onus on all of us, isn't it? Is to the extent that you uphold the right values in your own life, to the extent that the country you live in, demonstrates the values which are objective, and an integrated set of objective values that support freedom and individual rights and all those kind of things at country level, and that you're living by those by the proper values yourself, then everything else follows. But of course, in this mess that we're in at the moment, where one second a country, a leader is showing what sounds like the right values, and the next sense, his whim has disappeared into something else. I mean, to be honest, even if you look at what happened on October the 7th, 2023, that's when Israel was in control. That wasn't being influenced by America in terms of how it managed the border between Israel and Gaza. And of course, to the extent that it looked after its security and wasn't complacent and wasn't arrogant, it was able to repel the invasion of those terrorist hordes that came across the border. And to the extent that it wasn't upholding those values, it suffered the consequences, unfortunately. And of course, we all know what those consequences were. So, it is always up to the individual or the leader of the country itself, to uphold the values that it stands for. But it's a good point.
Yeah, and to summarize what I was talking about earlier, basically, when it comes to the values, something to mention is sort of, well, what is really the goal, right? I mentioned the quote from Naftali Bennett: handing over control of our destiny to Hamas sponsoring Qatar and to Erdogan is Oslo on steroids. And on some level, it is much worse than Oslo. I've said that Oslo brought in a terrorist organization to take power over Palestinians who want the wiping out of the state of Israel. Bringing in Turkey and Qatar into Gaza is giving states that are already have established militaries, much more Turkey than Qatar, but have established militaries, have like enemy state toward Israel. Turkey itself cut off all relations with Israel. Turkey itself is growing its influence in Syria, already has part of it, and there is a chance, non-zero chance, that they manage to take control over all of Syria. So you'd have like actual land border of a state that wants to wipe out the state of Israel. Turkey is no Lebanon or Hezbollah. Turkey is no Syria. Turkey is no Iran. Turkey is in NATO. Turkey has a Western army, and I think we might have. Oh, you're back. I thought we lost you again. Turkey is no state like any other. Turkey is like a army. Turkey actually has an army. Turkey is in NATO. Turkey has NATO weapons, and Turkey is in NATO. So any conflict between Israel and Turkey that might happen, we are going into uncharted territory. Marco, any thoughts on both sort of the
Yeah,
values? Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, you mentioned that the standard policy for the US was a two-state solution, and that actually the result of a nakedly pragmatic approach, isn't it? You got two sides fighting each other, and the obvious solution is, oh yeah, both of them should have what they want. Well, in this case, they cannot have both what they want because the Islamic side want the wiping out of the Jews and certainly not the existence of a Jewish state, and while Israel just wants to exist in a place where historically most of the people can track origin from the area, but which doesn't mean that it legitimates the fact that some Jews were there for thousands of years doesn't mean that it legitimates the state of Israel. The state of Israel is legitimated by the fact that it's a democratic country. It's the only democratic country in the Middle East. And it's a country who's trying to foster cooperation between different nations, different religions, different ethnicity, and to a certain extent, we see it function in a way that doesn't work anywhere else in the Middle East. So it's a matter of upholding the only standard that really matters, which is a state that empowers individual rights and creates a prosperous society because of that reason. Everything around it is a concrete realization. The fact that if you are a tyrant, if you are a theocracy, you cannot possibly thrive unless you leech off somebody else. And we see lots of examples of this. So yeah, this kind of pragmatism we see applied in international politics is exactly a kind of pragmatism that comes from not upholding reason effectively, just making policies on a whim, not realizing that actually there are some objective standards that you can rely upon if you use your mind to recognize what reality is.
I think one of the ways, or one of the examples you can look at, what was the influence of the US is on those strikes in June on Iran. And to what, who was it who determined that, and by what standard did they determine that taking out Al-Khamenei wasn't a suitable target and a final goal? Because I think there's a fair element of both countries deciding that fact for the same reason. Now, you can argue that America lent on Israel, but you can also argue that Israel didn't have the strength of its own convictions and was too paranoid or terrified of the consequences of doing that, in terms of, whatever would be treated as a religious outcome on the other side in response to that. But either way, it's not standing up for the values that means absolute victory against an enemy that has initiated force against you, which Iran most clearly had and was continuing to, and was threatening, frankly, the Western world and the civilized world along with it. So, but it's incumbent upon any country to stand up for it and to convince its ally to do the same. But of course, it is a personality-led coalition at the moment as much as a country-led cooperation between Israel and the US. And of course, it's that playing of personalities with each other and trying to keep everybody from doing something irrationally wild that is making it hard to predict and hard to retain logic to when analyzing it.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Ayatollah himself, Khomeini, the official story from Israel is that they never had an opportunity to take him out. Now, that's what they say. But let's move on into the conviction of Israel, because now there's been this great article on ARCUK from Moshe Feiglin. We had him on in the past on our show. And something to remember is when it comes to Gaza, Netanyahu never said Israel was going to occupy Gaza. Now, that was the only solution that you could have from this conflict. Occupation of Gaza is the only way out. Everything else is halfway, allows Hamas to exist, doesn't destroy Palestinianism as an ideology, or doesn't even challenge it. It allows it to continue and allows it to win. But the only thing evil needs to win is to survive another day. As long as it can survive to live another day, that's where it wins, because it can never really prosper. It can only parasitize. It can only try to destroy the good. So Feiglin has said that was the strategy from the beginning, talking about the fact that this was never about occupying. He said, President Trump told us he wanted us to be a dominant power in the region, but we weren't ready for that. people think Trump manipulated Netanyahu, but in fact, Netanyahu manipulated Trump. Trump, thinking like a businessman and a global bully, wanted to work with Netanyahu because his voters love us, but instead the Israeli national consciousness has collapsed. We've lost our sense of nationalism. And yeah, to a large extent, this is what is happening here. If people remember, I think this was basically shortly after Trump was inaugurated back in January. The ceasefire did happen before he even took office, but after that, he said that if Hamas breaks the rules, Netanyahu or that all hell will break loose. He put it in pretty vague terms. He didn't say America would go in. He didn't say Israel would go in, but he said hell would break loose. Now, again, this is where having the behind the scenes would be greatest, so we could actually know what is happening. But one potential thing that is happening there is that Netanyahu had a chance to go in, had a chance. And if you look at sort of Trump's policy in the past, recognizing the Golan Heights, his removal of the sanctions on Israeli settlements, recognition of Jerusalem as a capital of Israel, you had many of the actions that pretty much give Israel can do whatever it wants. There is no question. Just go in and do whatever you want. That was there, and we could assume that always was there. And basically, it's Netanyahu who, even if you go to the way he talks about Gaza, right? It's we are freeing Palestinians from Hamas. We are freeing Gaza. And he went for the ceasefire. The fact is, when it comes to the Biden influence, right, he was able to fight it. He was able to do the Hezbollah operation. He was able to attack Iran. He was able to go into Rafah, despite both the sanctions coming from the Biden side, the verbal stuff coming from his side of like telling him not to do so, even like actionable stuff like not giving the bunker busters bombs to Israel. There were things like that, but Netanyahu was still able to do so. When it comes to Trump, I think he, more than anything, has an option to do so and doesn't seem to do so. And, you could give it to Trump after that. What is he supposed to do, right? It's if Netanyahu doesn't want to do anything in Gaza, if Netanyahu doesn't want to take Gaza, well, somebody has to deal with it. Marco?
Well, it's a tough one because, of course, dealing with a president with dementia is not the same as dealing with a force of nature like Donald Trump. Frankly, whoever was using the auto pen on behalf of the Biden administration certainly wasn't such a tough nut to crack as Donald Trump is. I mean, Trump has got a ego the size of a planet. So I wouldn't be surprised if Netanyahu found it harder to stand up to Trump. Despite what Trump said in terms of, if you don't return your hostages by the end of tomorrow, there's going to be hell to pay on this kind of bluster. Netanyahu wasn't quite ready to go into Gaza. Frankly, going into Gaza, putting boots on the ground would have been risking more lives of soldiers. I mean, about 900 soldiers died during this campaign the last 2 years. That's insane because really Gaza should have been flattened within a week or so. And we said this a number of times. Netanyahu talks a good talk, but when it comes to actually showing what it means to defend your own state, well, he failed miserably a number of times, October the 7th, and as a response, frankly, place and show that every time you attack Israel, every time there is a ceasefire, somebody attacks Israel, decide to break the ceasefire, well, that somebody will pay once and for all. But he wasn't able to do this. He wasn't willing to do this. And for some reason, they were prepared to go into Lebanon. They were prepared to go into Iran, but they weren't ready to go into Gaza. Clearly, that was a much longer determination that the state of Israel did about Gaza. Frankly, if it were for me, I would take over the West Bank as well and get over it. You have another terrorist state within your borders. So what the hell? If you really meant to, of course, now you can't do it because Trump has effectively tied Netanyahu's hands, effectively pushing it towards achieving sort of Abraham Accord plus plus plus. He's trying to strike deals with with country in the region to sort of normalize the ties with Israel, because he probably thinks that by the route he can achieve what he couldn't, what the United States has not been able to achieve for the last 80 years. But I mean, yeah, the guy who wrote The Art of Deal is trying to pull deals left, right, and center. But the problem that if you don't recognize who you're dealing with, you might find yourself with no cards to play with.
And then it's probably important at this point to mention like the letter that Trump has written in support of Netanyahu or to Herzog to request or encourage him towards a pardon for Netanyahu in his well, I have to use the term corruption trial or charges, although the extent to which those warrant the term corruption, whether they're puny or inflated is I haven't got a full grip on, but it's certainly not of the nature of corruption that you see elsewhere that goes unremarked upon, let alone uncharged. But anyway, Trump showing that support to Netanyahu is all part of the trade-offs. You'll do this, I'll do that, you'll do this. And of course, that can be a shameless game of pragmatism, as opposed to it may also be based on some values of support as to what an ally should do for another ally. But of course, it depends on the extent to which the details are known by both allies and can be relied upon. All of that makes assessing it quite tricky from the outside, frankly. But it's significant, certainly, that Trump has written at this time, and of course he said so when he was giving his speech to the Knesset, didn't he? He basically off the cuff or in the way that he likes to throw somebody in the spotlight who's not ready for it. He did the same to Herzog to say, why don't you pardon Netanyahu while he was standing there. So it's consistent with the approach he's taking. But yeah, it's not particularly edifying to see that side of it, but it's a factor. We've got to recognize it.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the corruption charges, I've actually looked into a few days ago into them just to sort of have some overview. And yeah, it's sort of there is some evidence for it. That's why the trials are taking place. I think almost all of them have to deal with some sort of personal rewards. I think in one case it's like personal gifts that he accepted and shouldn't have. I think that case is the weakest thing, and I think the two others are given with two news sources, or I think telecommunications or something, where basically they were supposed to give Netanyahu a positive coverage, and he in turns was supposed to give them or sort of like some freeing on regulation. Now, I think all those charges are not fully there. I think many of them, or at least the cases, might not be strong enough to actually prove his guilt. But something that is always weird about sort of when people say political witch hunts is like, you can do wrong thing, somebody can go after you for political reasons, and both of them can be like true at the same time. And even then, you could have done something wrong, and it simply cannot be proven in a court of law. So when it comes to the severity of what he did, that seems sort of weak. Although I do not necessarily want to give him like, oh, the corruption charges you did are not that strong, so we shouldn't go after this. I think there is certain acceptance of you do not go after the leaders of a nation for like every single little thing, because it would make it impossible to govern if everybody can go after you after every single thing. So generally, it's like it's it's like a weird thing. But fundamentally, I think this should be left to Herzog, who can do, and he is technically the one that has a chance to decide of this if this is sort of like a political sham, or people are going after Netanyahu for political reasons. I think Netanyahu himself has considered that he might ask for the pardon, so I'd say I would give it there. And if Herzog decides to give pardon to Netanyahu, I don't think it will be the worst thing ever. I don't know if, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues about the pardon is whether you have to admit guilt before you'll be given a pardon or not, or whether he gets his wife to apply for him or whatever. But all of that, it seems like messy soap opera detail. The wider context for me that I find interesting is that you're also seeing, Trump himself is dealing with international leaders, and international leaders are dealing with Trump via a set of rather conspicuous gifts from regular intervals, Switzerland giving him an engraved gold bar, or some Far Eastern country giving him a crown the other week, and various trinkets and
Power playing.
yeah, Qatar play, yeah, exactly. So and all of that, normalizes that process when that isn't how anyone should trade the values of their country, if that's what they're doing. Now, whether he's just accepting the gifts and doing what he was going to do anyway, different cases you could argue different points. But yeah, if you had leaders with integrity, they wouldn't be interested in any gift from anyone like that. That would be irrelevant. And frankly, you wouldn't give it the time of day or any attention. In fact, you may not even accept it, or you may shove it in a museum somewhere, whatever. But that's the nature of how things like the royalty in the UK or the Queen dealt with many of those kind of things. But
We should probably also note the fact that if something like that happened in Saudi Arabia, I mean, the Saudi Arabian guy really is responsible for the murder of a journalist in an embassy in Turkey. So, nobody goes after him. Who will go out after Putin or Xi Jinping? Or even here in the West, we've seen the president of France being indicted for some irregularity, some criminal activity related to Libya. He went to jail and now already out. Here, how ministers of state, prime minister, whatever, have got massive cronyism, getting presents from millionaires, pretending to be the men of the people, and they're still getting away with it. I begin to wonder, why is the issue of Netanyahu so prominent? It's perhaps a bit of a political machination behind the plot. And by any means, if he's done something wrong, I'm sure that the institutions in Israel will go after him. But that's something that wouldn't happen in Syria or Egypt or any of the other places around the Middle East, frankly.
Yeah, and Deborah in the chat says, "What is he guilty of? Accepted a stuffed animal for his now-grown child?" I mean, again, when it comes to the different cases that alleged, when it comes to the sort of gift cases, I think it is like expensive champagne and cigars and stuff like that. When it comes to the other two cases, it is like positive coverage in the news. Now that is hard to prove, and that has like a high bar of proving. And I think the both cases are struggling to sort of fully have a cohesive argument. But again, that's the thing that you have to do if you are a leader of a nation. You shouldn't accept any gifts, because yeah, it's how can then the people know if this is just okay, you just accepted it and well, it's whatever, or if you are being compromised because of it, right? That's why the conflict of interest, the problem isn't necessarily that you might do something for it. It's like, we don't know if you've compromised your position. That's what conflict of interest is, that we cannot prove if somebody is being objective. I mean, put yourself in any like situation, right? If you are at some executive position or any managerial position, right, and you have to deal with your family member as your employee, or with your friend as your employee, it's even you yourself almost can impossibly prove objectivity in you, because it's so hard to completely detach yourself and be completely objective with somebody that you already have preconceived notions about. So that's the problem with the conflict of interest. That's why we have regulations when it comes to accepting a gift, because we cannot even prove necessarily that what you might do because of it. I don't know if you guys have any additions to it.
No, no, it's a point well made, I think, absolutely.
Um, Sorry, I guess sort of wrapping up, because I did want to talk about Iran a little bit, is that, yeah, I think fundamentally, unfortunately, it's Israel that is, and always for the history of Israel, or for a long time, I wouldn't say for all of it. I think since other nations, since Israel could rely on other nations to do something, Israel has continuously surrendered its own sovereignty and refused to stand up on its own feet. Whether it comes to the two-state solution with the Oslo Accords, whether it comes to occupation with Gaza, now it seems like Israel has been increasingly content with simply, letting somebody else and deal with the situation and hope for the best, hope that things go the right way. But the fact is, only you can have your self-interest in mind. And even if America had Israeli self-interest in mind, we do not have the proper philosophy beyond the borders to really know what it is the correct thing to do, let alone in Israel. But Marco, any last thoughts on this topic?
Well, and the self-interest is interest for yourself, so you can't expect somebody else to have that on your behalf. You either stand up for your values or you don't. You can't expect somebody else to come and rescue you. We're not living in a fairy tale. So yeah, I mean,
The self-interest is acquiring a big sack of gold items today at the expense of your integrity in the long term. Then you're misunderstanding the term self-interest as we're using it in an objective sense, because you're talking about your long term, and it's not about short-term whim or immediate pleasure,
yeah.
devoid or in conflict with your long-term life and values.
Now let's move to the second topic. We'll might go for a little bit longer, but it's Iran specifically. There's been a sort of thing going around on the internet from Colonel Ibrahim Agaye Komazani. Or I think this is a separate one. There's been a few things where he openly calls for Iranians to stand up. He has the old Iranian flag behind him, the one with sun and I think it's called sun and a lion and the sun flag. It's this old sort of the
Yeah.
monarchy, yeah, of the Shah's Iran. He also said, I invite the people of Iran on Sunday, November 16, with the flag of the Lion and the Sun, initiate a million-strong march for the transition from the Islamic Republic regime. Now, this has now been also shared by the Pahlavi princess. So she is trying to give it some voice. There's been also a separate video with sort of two soldier people that look like soldiers with also this flag in some metro-like looking building, possibly inside Iran. But again, this is something that is just there. One thing I would mention, I looked into this specific person, so he doesn't seem to be colonel, isn't that high in sort of like Iranian army. I did found from a year ago, apparently he was arrested for doing something against the regime. And then I found a post from 2 weeks ago that he temporarily left prison. So the timeline would make sense, and the video itself was 2 weeks. So there is a chance that this guy has already been arrested since the original video from 2 weeks ago has been posted 2 weeks ago. And he only temporarily left prison and immediately went to making like anti-regime, basically propaganda or calling for violence against the regime. I didn't find why he was released. By the way, he got half a year for insulting Khomeini. So that's this is the free regime of Iran. But yeah, so there is this chance. Marco, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, no, it just made me giggle when you said committing violence against the regime. Well, that's justice, really, frankly. If you go against a regime like the theocratic dictatorship of the Islamic Republic of Iran, what you do is actually justice. But yeah, I mean, I'm very wary about this kind of stuff because we know that Iran has been producing lots and lots of propaganda, and we know because during the strikes that Israel bashed the regime with the missiles, that propaganda stopped just when the regime stopped the use of internet, so it wouldn't be looking too stupid with his own slave citizens. So this could be it could be a case of Iran going after this guy by producing fake videos, for example. We know that after the United States decided not to go for Khamenei, the regime cracked down on people like him who are against the regime, who were actively try and stand up to them. This could be another of those instances where they actually show openly, oh, this guy is against them, so we're gonna go after him. But could be also true, and if it is true, it's a very good sign. It's a very good sign that the population in Iran finally is tired of being effectively enslaved by this theocracy, by these crazy clowns in long sleeves and beards, who have effectively been terrorized their own population for the last, 35 years, 40 years? Longer than that, isn't it? Nearly 50 odd years, 50, whatever it is. Um, and this is good news if it goes ahead.
Yeah, I mean, normally I'm a bit wary about promoting in advance things like protests and demonstrations that are yet to come that could turn violent. But the idea that you may have 1 million people turning up this weekend in the Iranian capital to help overturn or, advocate for overturning the theocratic regime that's in charge, then absolutely that deserves to be promoted to every Iranian ear that can influence anyone to show up, because it's only going to be through that kind of activity that this regime will come to an end. But of course, it's also more likely to be, and this is probably the final element we're likely to go on to now, I guess, Daniel, is going to be how the people are suffering under that regime. And if that includes lack of water, then that might be a greater impetus for over for toppling the regime, because that lack of water is one product of it being a dictatorship.
Yeah, and you mentioned sort of the people suffering, and what we are seeing is extreme droughts starting in Iran. Again, as I mentioned, there is being talked about moving the capital of Iran south to the sea because of the extreme water droughts. Now, I've mentioned on Tuesday that I don't even remember the last time a capital of a country was moved, let alone for not environmental reasons, but sort of for like not even economic reasons, but like lacking basic thing for a town to be there, having water. This is the kind of thing that you see, well, I guess in third world countries, which is appropriate. But yeah, having water and not having water is can be the decisive factor when it comes to taking out Iran. So we also Tuesday we discussed that apparently a high-ranking official in Israel said that they want to take out the Iranian regime by the end of Trump's term, and I cannot see the better opportunity than right now. You have the droughts, you have possible people trying to standing up to Iran. We know there is a long time opposition to the Iranian regime and has been in Iran for a while. There isn't better time than right now. Not to mention, as I mentioned on Tuesday, China will have to be taken care of in a little bit when they invite Taiwan. I think Iran has to be dealt with before dealing with Taiwan. Not to mention, stopping Iran is helping you also with Russia. Russia has deals with Iran. There is an exchange of weapons. Stopping one will help you stop the other. something. So yeah, I think this is a perfect opportunity to do. I think it was even Israel that when they, I might misremember it, but when they like got some stuff in Syria, they gave it to Ukraine to fight against Russia. Like Russian stuff seized in Syria, they gave to Ukraine to fight Russia. We can have a similar situation here, although I'm not sure how much Iranian stuff is really up to date to be used in modern warfare.
Well,
Marco.
most Iranian stuff is Russian stuff anyway, isn't it? So, yeah, I mean, again, I'm super skeptical about this news coming up now. I mean, the drying up of a reservoir, the size of the one outside Tehran, it doesn't happen overnight. And it's a surprise it comes out while COP30 is happening, where people are talking about environmental catastrophe and climate change, those kind of crap. So it's quite interesting that this news comes out now. But it's true. I mean, this again is an example of how a dictatorship cannot do the interests of their own citizens. How a dictatorship is by definition a failure of a state. Sooner or later, we run out of energy, run out of water, run out of whatever. They're not sustainable because they're based on the whim of a very small elite who depend on lies effectively in order to keep power. And that again shows that if you want a happy, prosperous, rich society, and you must free the individuals from to produce and look after their own lives. Free individuals are happy individuals, rich individuals that make up for rich societies. Going down the route of socialism and dictatorship, theocracies doesn't work. We've been there for 2,000 years. Doesn't work.
And diverting the economic produce of the country towards war and the nuclear stuff that Iran has been doing for a long time has diverted it away from the crucial infrastructure of looking after dams and a new water supply. And of course, by suppressing your people, by having a lot of corruption in terms of who's in charge of what, you end up with the wrong people in charge, you end up with the incompetent in charge, and that again accelerates the decline of a country's infrastructure and its ability for people to look after themselves and for the country to thrive. And of course, at the same time, you've always got the invisible side of it, the what might have been, what might have been across those decades had there not been a dictatorship in there. All of those, strong minds with capabilities and talent, and what might they have invented, what might they have done, what might have been built. How much better those lives might have been. And of course, all of that comes into sharp focus when you see lives falling apart at its most basic essential. Find water to drink and water to wash in. And of course, we've seen already how dictatorships work, and they're doing so in Tehran at the moment. It's understood that the poor areas have got dribbles coming out of their taps. The wealthier areas currently have a supply, but that is shortly to run out with these reservoirs. This particular reservoir down at like 3% of its capacity for holding water. That's what it's down to at the moment, and 19 reservoirs all being on the brink of running out of water. So once it also hits the richer neighborhoods as well, then there's momentum for turning up on the streets, for overthrowing the regime, for saying that this has failed. You have failed us. We have failed by supporting the Iranian regime for so long, and then perhaps the tide will turn.
Yeah, and something I wanted to mention. So the dead body of a hostage has been given to Israel. So yeah, or in Israel hands. Yeah, that's another body. So at
Potentially
least
one of the final four, isn't it? So,
yeah, I think that there has been sort of draping sort of every few days or so, and yeah, I'm not sure actually how many are left, but yeah, it isn't that much. Well, with that, yeah, when it comes to Israel, I hope, I mean, something that needs to happen is Israel, first and foremost, needs to want to actually be sovereign, and not only sovereign, but actually want to do what is in its interest, which it hasn't been. And when it comes to Iran, we've advocated for strike against Iran since 79, 20 whatever years before I was born. But no, we had Ayn Rand, for example, when it came to Iran, she was saying that on day one, there had to be America had to be involved against Iran. American hostages were taken. The goal of the Iranian regime was to fight against America, and since then, that's the only thing it has been doing, both against America and Israel itself. So something absolutely needs to happen whenever you have the best opportunity possible. Marco, any last thoughts from you, and where can people find you?
Well, yeah, I mean, all these principles we've been talking about come from largely the writing of Ayn Rand. She stressed how important it is to look at reality, understand it, just using the power of your mind, and then sticking to the principles that effectively are followed by reality itself. And if you fake reality, you'll find yourself in a situation where you don't know what to do, you don't know what's gonna come. But if you're able to analyze the facts of reality, not make them up, and keep your brain engaged, do not evade, you can actually see what happens. You can forecast, you can project what's going to happen, and you'll see things come a mile ahead. That's why you read her stuff and she looks so like she could read the future. No, she couldn't read the future. She wasn't a magician or anything like that. But she could apply reason to the facts of reality. That's the kind of power it gives you. And the good news is that a free society, a happy society can be achieved. It's not a utopian socialist dream. In fact, socialism goes the opposite direction. It's when you free the individual to produce, you're gonna reach the state. It is reachable. We don't have to go to war. We don't have to appease dictators. We can just, make the best, be productive, and use our minds.
Yeah. And the other aspect of what she talked about is so much to do with the individual themselves and their own lives. And those same principles apply. Trying to seek unearned advantage or unearned reward will eventually, those chickens will come home to roost and corrode the person who acquired them by cheating or illegitimate means. So, the lessons are there across the board, and she makes all the kind of connections necessary to make them super clear. So, thoroughly recommend reading any of Ayn Rand that you haven't read before, and if you haven't read anything at all, maybe start with the fiction as a really, really good and easy way to get into the basic principles which she's talking about. In terms of where you can find us, do check out the Briefly Objective, the sister channel to this. The link is in the description below for lots of short videos that we made on some of the key aspects, particularly in the conflict in the Middle East that we've been discussing today and on frequent episodes on this channel. Check it out.
And you can also check us out tomorrow with more episodes. Thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and bye bye.